But there's no doubt about it that those who are more interested in the Conservative agenda are using this thing, as you say, where, well, in Britain, remember we began with Brexit early on in our conversation. Of course, their slogan was "Take back control," and the genius of that statement was to take back, the word back, because take control was one thing. It sounds like a seizure of power. Take back control suggests that you once had a thing that you've lost, that the EU has taken from you. And there's a great deal of this going on at the moment where, you have it in America with the Make America Great Again. Right. And it's arguable, well, when was America never not great or less great or more great than it is now? But when you put in the again, it tells people you're getting back something that was taken from you. Right. Take back or again. So it's a kind of it's a very, very clever, and it works.
Buddy, and welcome back to my podcast. John D. Healy here. Podcast is called It's Good to Talk, and it sure is good to talk. My sponsors are Liffey Van Lines, moving company here in New York City, and they've been around longer than Jeopardy. And I'm waiting for my guest, not my guest today, I have him, but Austin that won Jeopardy will be on in a few weeks. And I hope I have all the answers for him. No, I'll have the questions and he'll have the answers. I always give a shout out to Irish Examiner USA, great paper here in New York and around the surrounding areas. News, entertainment, the arts, news from Ireland too and across the pond. And you'll catch up more on what's going on in terms of functions and elections too. Now, my guest today is Brian Leyden, all the way from Ireland. He's no stranger. He's been on here before. We talked about the Good Friday Agreement. We did cover other aspects of history. Indeed, we talked a lot about Michael Collins and the similarity between the Good Friday Agreement and what Collins had completed then. Brian I have read 3 of Brian's books, The Home Place and Summer of 69, and another one called Sweet Tales of the World. My favorite one of those was Summer of 69 because it left you very curious if it was about JFK assassination or something else. It had a lot of subplots. Brian, welcome back to my podcast. Good to have you back with us. What's happening in your world?
Thank you. Lots. Thank you, John. It's lovely to be talking to you again. I have a new novel out, actually. This one. It's
What's the name of it?
It's called Love These Days, and it means it's good to love the days you're around and what's love about these days. Good. So it's a novel, and it's set on an island off the coast of the northwest of Ireland, which is a nice departure for me because I've written, as you said, about politics and mining and farming and that. So it's lovely to move to the sea and create a new experience really for me.
And it's an island off Galway or Mayo or?
Well, technically, it's very like the kind of Aaronmore Island off Donegal, but I moved it down the coast to Sligo. Okay. So you can do that when you're a writer. You can move
poetic justice, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, I look forward to getting that book because then I, if I read the other ones, I'll have to read that one, of course. I'm like a traditional economist. How is your wife compared to what? Anyways, today our topic is going to be elections are coming up. The European elections are coming up, and the Irish local elections are coming up too. Mm-hmm. So let me widen the screen here for myself. Now I look much happier here, and I'm good to live. Okay, so there's 27 countries in Europe that will be voting for the European Parliament. And every country therein is allowed a certain number of members to
represent.
Yeah, correct. So, and it depends on population. So Ireland this year will have 4. I think the last time around they had 13. So their population, I guess, went up a bit. UK, England, because they left Europe, they will not have a voice in the European Parliament. And unfortunately, our cousins in the north of Ireland won't have a voice either because they're stuck on the hindtit of the UK still. Now, if they were smart enough to get away from the UK, they would have representation in Europe. And like all of us, they'd be proud Europeans. 720 members in the European Parliament will be sworn in, or whatever the case may be, come June 6th, June 7th, and all that, give or take a few days, depending on what country. So let's talk about our Irish representation, Brian.
Yes.
big names are out again.
Yeah. Now, I won't get into specifics or promoting specific candidates, John, but you may know them or I may know some. And like you say there, just to address that thing of it is a very unfortunate circumstance that we live very close to the border here in Northern Ireland. It's an open border, of course, and there's a common travel area still in existence between Ireland and the UK, and that at least gives us a kind of an access. There is, of course, a deep anomaly with Northern Ireland. As you rightly pointed out, the nearest thing to representation they would have is, in fact, kind of a party like Sinn Féin, who very tactically, deliberately, and as an identity straddle the border and will try to be sort of a voice to represent the two sides. They would rather see no border at all. They would rather be part of a united Ireland. That's its circumstance, though, until there's a referendum in the north where there's consent on that the situation will obtain that you have, in fact, this piece of the island of Ireland, which has a special relationship through negotiations that have been going on with the EU to have trade deals and arrangements and agreements. And technically, the border exists down this, although they deny that, but there is a kind of a trade or at least some monitoring of goods crossing between the two jurisdictions, And of course, tricky situation too is that for your listener, the EU is started out as a kind of an economic union, and then it becomes a political union. And that political union was appealing to all of the countries, including the UK for a time. It grew out of a sense of food security. Europe was, after the Second World War, we needed to pull together, and there was a vision for a more united Europe. In theory, it's a very good idea. We have almost a single currency in the euro, but again, Britain opted out of that and chose to keep their sterling. So Britain was always this very slightly different relationship to the EU than even Ireland had. I think Ireland sees ourselves as European, and Britain has always seen themselves as separatist. And sadly, that impulse is very strong amongst people who would consider themselves unionists or more aligned with the Crown of Britain than with...
I totally agree with you. And the big mistake, I guess, that I always seem to blame Boris with the red hair. There's 500 million consumers in all of Europe. That's a huge market if you're producing or if you're a farmer or agriculture or whatever you're selling or buying, to have access to that. Now, the United States here, where I'm on the podcast to you from New York, the Americans took full advantage for the benefit of Ireland and America to see the stepping stone of Ireland as a stepping stone into Europe, into the 500 consumers. So everybody in the tech world, like from Intel, Dell, even Google, Hewlett Packard, you name them, and indeed pharmaceutical countries like Pfizer and people that make all kinds of medical products from, as you know well, from Galway down to Cork and all over, have access to 500 million. Now, Boris and the UK, they voted to leave Europe, but only by a small margin, by 1%. I think it was 51%. And ironically enough, which I think is very unfair to my friends in the north of Ireland, they voted to stay. They wanted to stay in Europe, but they had to go with Boris. And then, of course, he forgot about the Rock of Gibraltar. He forgot about the Falkland Islands. But I must be the only person on the planet that reminds people that the Falkland Islands off Argentina are actually owned by the British. There's more sheep there than people. Anyways, let's go back to the elections. I guess the big parties, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Sinn Féin, Greens, I assume. And
Greens, yeah.
Independents, yeah. So let's talk about how it's divided up.
Traditionally, you have the two major parties, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and they will be pushing the major amount of candidates. You had, in the last time round in the European elections, the Greens, there was a green tide, really, and there was a big movement towards the Green parties. This year, there's a feeling that the Greens will suffer at the hands of independents. Single-issue candidates rural candidates who are agitating over what, in a sense, there are new directives coming from Europe to improve the quality of water, to renature the place. Some of it is not sitting well with farmers, and they are beginning to sort of push their own agendas and candidates, single issue candidates. Where in this part of the world, you might have heard from John, Luke Ming Flanagan was nearly the
I'm about
sole
to talk
guy.
about him now.
Yeah, he started out as a kind of a pot smoking hippie type advocate, but more and more he began to agitate, particularly over the right to cut turf for Irish farmers and preserving peatlands, and it became a big issue for him. But he also kept a very wary eye on trade deals that Europe was doing with people, basically large corporate interests in Europe, making deals that weren't in the interest of Irish farmers or the citizens of Europe, basically. And he was kind of keeping a cherry eye on that. So he kind of opened the doorway for other candidates to come through. And the feeling is that on those issues, that will be part of what will colour the final arrangement of those 14 candidates in the end.
Well, you know what? I have to commend them, as a young guy, pothead or no pothead. I know lots of brilliant potheads here in New York City, and, they're no fools by any means.
No, neither is Luke.
Intelligent, and they're an academic and so on and so forth. So he did find his following, and he was, I think, smart enough to use the cannabis weed thing to, number one, highlight it. Number two, he was maybe slightly before his time, and that got him in to be a member of the European Parliament. And I feel that he will be successful again. Now, I'm a big Sinn Féin supporter, so I'm looking at the Sinn Féin group this time out. Mary Lou, the other First Minister in the North, they have a strong team out.
Yeah, Michelle.
Michelle. And their team, and in the local elections as well, may I add. And a lot of young people are joining Sinn Féin. Like, I can give a shout out here to a friend of mine. His mother lives in New York, and that is Brendan Flynn Cal. Brendan Cal Flynn, two surnames. Now, he's running for the Greens down in Waterford, Wexford area. He's probably one of the youngest candidates at the moment running. However old he is, I'll be like Donald Trump. I'll forget if he's 17 or 18, but I think he's 18. Okay, and I forgot his son's birthday and forgot the age. But anyways, Brendan is a smart young kid. Academic background, well educated, and you like most young people, they know the issues and they know how to market, get a manifesto out, and campaign. It's a Sinn Féin group. I noticed people his age too running for local elections, and
that energy, the local elections. I mean, I'm here in North Sligo. This is a beautiful time of year to be in Ireland. For the Green candidates, with the sense of nature coming round, the white blossom is on the hawthorn. And there's a great blooming of posters in the ditches as well, and billboards for all our candidates, local and European. And you would say that across the billboards and posters, you do see younger and younger faces. There are the old guard and the return candidates, and they have done enough in Europe, and would be known, I suppose, to activists and people who follow these things that, they got us this concession, be it derogations on use of fertilizer, derogations on milk quotas and all of that. So there's an awful lot of, shall we say, horse trading that goes on, unbeknownst to maybe the average punter like me, who's just looking at this array of faces and thinking, as you said, John, there's your friend now, lovely young candidate coming. We have several younger candidates here. We have this, as you say, I would say, fighting for the same ground, the Greens, the Independents, and some of the Sinn Féin. Their issues are maybe more on the rise in terms of pushing slightly back from, it was always seen as the farmers as being the strongest lobby group, and their candidates as the ones who did the best. And of course, farming, as it is in America, as it is in Europe, is hugely based on subsidies. There's a lot of subsidies, and a lot of that goes on. And the fact of the matter is that...
in fairness, when Jack Lynch, the Taoiseach at the time, Prime Minister, brought us into Europe, we needed the support of Europe for infrastructure, to build the roads and all that. Before that, we were
that's right.
Pothole land, especially in Leitrim. But a hero of mine from Castlebar, Oric Flynn, known as P. Flynn, when he went to Europe, he knew how to pull the levers and get whatever was good for Ireland, of course, from Europe. No shame, shall we say, no shame at all. Get what was best for Mayo.
Yes.
So the motorways and the roads were upgraded 1, 2, 3, thanks to Porrick Flynn. The local guard, I think it was like 88 down on the list, and all of a sudden became top priority. So Porrick had that politician attitude. Let's get it done. And that's why I admire Porrick Flynn a lot. I know he got roasted on the Late Late Show when he got carried away, and he explained to everyone the benefits of being an MEP. I mean, I'd love to be an MEP. You get a free apartment in Brussels. You get a good salary.
About €27,000 a month, John, which is all right.
Well, you know what? I would nearly go there for the free apartment and the benefits and expenses. I don't know. I donate 27,000 a month.
It's an interesting one, John, because as you say, with the likes of P. Flynn, and anyone who's done the European Blaney and other stuff, politics is local, and if you don't look after your own base, you're in trouble. And though you may be in Europe, I mean, it is a well-paid job, but it is a tough enough job because you have to maintain that travel. We would have had in Leitrim, who stepped out of the political arena now, Marion Harkin, herself and, as we mentioned, Luke would have formed alliance just in the travel over and back to stay in touch with your constituency and to travel to Europe. And that is a big thing, and that's what it'll be. It's nice to see younger people who have that kind of vision, but they will need that bit of old dog for the hard road experience to know that you may be going there to fight on one issue, but Europe can swallow you up. Remember, it's a kind of a 3-tier thing. We are sending, the electorate, on the 7th of June, will be voting for members of the European Parliament, MEPs. But you also have, which is, the European Commission, which is kind of the executive arm of running. And this is made up of its commissioners, which each of the
European Court.
Yes, the European Court. And then you have the Council of Europe, which is made up of the leaders of the European countries and the elected leaders and some of theirs. So you've got a kind of nearly, as you say, 4 levels of if whatever your issue is, it has to be able to bed in with these, and they have to take it up as they are called. So I can't name them off. There's Liberal Democrats and there's Socialist parties. They form. There's the Socialists and there's the Greens in Europe. So they form like their own parties within the European Parliament.
Before we join Europe, and I want to give another shout out to another Mayo person, President Mary Robinson, and she was a barrister, attorney, whatever. And when she got involved in the gay lesbian rights, she was able to go to the European Court and get rid of the old stigma that if you are a homosexual in Mayo or Leitrim or Galway or Dublin, the police, the Gardaí, could arrest you just because you wore
into the 1990s, it was still a criminal offence.
So I think it was definitely Mary Robinson and another guy from Dublin, Norris something. They brought the case to Europe, and it was won. So, and it opened up, and then from then, of course, some people on the other side of the coin might say, "Oh my God, no! Now it's instead of Adam and Eve, it's Adam and Steve." The gay marriage.
The thing here, John, is that you've hit on a very interesting point, which is this: that luckily, in one sense, where the political swing in Europe is to become more right-wing and conservative and extreme. And there is definitely a kind of a drift in that direction. Perhaps it's a bit exaggerated, but it's certainly there. Whereas the odd thing about it, where Ireland was always seen as a very good Catholic conservative country, we're actually amongst the leading liberals in Europe now, as you say, agitating for all round. And that social equality and justice in terms of sexuality, pay, in terms of marriage, marital status, all of that. And we have have managed the divorce referendum, other things. So we have managed in some ways, it's strange. We're almost like counterintuitively going the other way to the rest of Europe. That's the thing in Ireland. But there's no doubt about it that those who are more interested in the conservative agenda are using this thing, as you say, where, well, in Britain, remember we began that with Brexit early on in our conversation. Of course, their slogan was "Take back control," and the genius of that statement was to take back, the word back, because take control was one thing. It sounds like a seizure of power. Take back control suggests that you once had a thing that you've lost, that the EU has taken from you. And there's a great deal of this going on at the moment, where, well, you have it in America with the Make America Great Again. Right. And it's arguable, well, when was America never not great or less great or more great than it is now? But when you put in the again, it tells people you're getting back something that was taken from you. Right. Take back or again. So it's a kind of it's a very, very clever, and it works. And the second strand you bring to that in the politics of Europe at the moment, as in the United States, you pick one issue that's really bothering people and you really address their concerns, and then you agitate around that, and you say, well, do you see now what the European Court has done to you? You can't own a house, or your wages or whatever, your neighborhood is going downhill because of immigration policy. That has become the kind of new political tool, especially Europe, because we're seeing in Holland, we're seeing in Italy, we're seeing it in the kind of Hungary, particularly, and to a degree it was there in Poland. It has come back a bit from that. You're definitely seeing the rise of more of the right wing in France as well, because in a way, when you agitate around single issues, it spares you having to explain, well, it's a bit more complicated than that to look after everybody.
There is a candidate running there. I think he's running in Dublin, a journalist and writer like yourself, John Waters, who was actually married to Sinead O'Connor. But that's a whole different story for another day. And John has been someone for years and years and years that has been advocating rights for men who have been in a divorce where the law sides with the woman, the wife, and the guy all of a sudden, he doesn't get half a house, he gets the outside of the house, and sometimes has to sleep in his car, and all of those hardships. And not too many people brought that topic to the fore, like John Waters. And he's talked a lot about it and explained a lot about it and tried to do a lot to bring it out. And sometimes, I was talking about Paul O'Dwyer, politician, last week, and sometimes guys like that, they get knocked, they get abused for just highlighting something that should be highlighted, not swept under the carpet. But divorce and divorce lawyers, they love the divorce situation, and the more money, the better, because the more money they get. And of course, the woman is going to win the case. And I know I'll probably get knocked for saying that. But if you look at the stats, it's proven time and time again. And I know many situations here in New York where it's home to divorce, we should call it. It's not like the home place, Brian. But let's go back to other.
I suppose, John, this harks back again to our kind of issue-based things, because it is a deep fear in Ireland, fear for land and farms, and that marriages, the old bad wisdom of, you walk up the aisle with the farm, you walk down the aisle with half a farm. That was the old thing. But at the same time, what the single issue candidates are tending to do is to agitate around this, because you'll meet many an aggrieved wife, divorced, who finds that yoke of a husband now has half her home and half her income and never did a day's work. So you'll get it on both sides, or you'll get partners. It is, look, we all know this. If an old friend of mine used to say, going to court, no matter what it is like a tennis match. The ball can bounce anyway on the day. There's no guarantee how this will go for you. That is the fear of the courts. That's why it's always better to resolve your differences through mediation and through agreed and all of that, rather than, what's the old, to keep up the farming analogy, the farm thing was the cow with with one lawyer pulling the cow's head, or no, the husband pulling the cow's head, the wife pulling the cow's tail, and the lawyer milking the cow. That was the old cartoon. So that's what you kind of get into when you go down those roads. But I have no doubt about it that these things are part of the political kind of zeitgeist, as you'd call it now, where fear on farmers that the green agenda is costing them their livelihoods and that they don't sufficiently respect that the purpose of land is to produce food and we're there to feed people first and foremost, if you're a farmer, and not to protect it as they would see it for Range Rover driving kind of urbanites using the countryside as a playground. And there are people who talking that up. It is, look, if there was a motto for the current elections and what's going on from it, says the truth is under pressure.
Yes.
That's the world, and that's the kind of politics. And if
that's global, Brian.
Sort of, an umbrella over all of it. I think we talked again about Britain. We saw political interference in the Brexit. We saw how Cambridge Analytica was a device that was used to kind of target people on Facebook and moved a constituency that was invisible to the politicians to vote a particular way and shocked. Well, now, David Cameron was an idiot anyway, but a lot of things came as a surprise to him, reality being one of them. But he made the biggest political blunder, I'd say, of any British statesman ever with Brexit. That's done now, and there's no going back. There'll be resolutes and all of that. But there was a case where we were seeing that there's definitely malevolent bad actors involved in politics now who are there trying to manipulate the vote and the voters' thinking and agitate them in definite ways to get a definite result that, funny enough, is not in the interests of the people who end up voting that way.
I totally agree, Brian. My guest today is Brian Leyden. He's a historian and journalist and writer from the west coast of Ireland. My podcast I'm John D. Healy. My podcast is called It's Good to Talk, and it is good to talk. And just something you said there, Brian, I mean, words matter when words can hurt, words can heal, and words can divide. I don't know who said that, but I just said it now anyways. But coming back to more of the Irish people seeking to be members of the Emmy in Parliament, I see some of the old names there, like Blaney in Donegal is a strong, strong name up that part of the country. I see Barry Andrews in Dublin, coming from a political family, pretty strong. I see a few weak ones that I think are there for the glass of wine and a slice of cake, Some of those have been there for that, and the perks, and the benefits. And then the new ones getting in, if you are on a low income, you get in here, you get a leg up, and it's a good career. And I've come across politicians like that in Ireland too, where it's like it's a job for them and an easy job. You made a comment there about the farmers and the farming. And when a lot of farms in the 70s were switched over to golf courses, the golf course was more lucrative than the cows. So any other comments on members?
I do think that, and I'm speaking kind of broadly now, but I do think that I have great regard for the farming and the farming community and how they respond to the requirement. And if you tell them, we need milk, we need to boost milk production, they'll boost milk production.
Yes.
If you say, no, we need more suckler and beef now for the meat factories, they'll boost that. No, we need more tillage. Now, tillage has been a devastatingly tough ask this year because of the weather conditions. And I mean, imagine Ireland has a shortage of potatoes, so there you are, But the fact of the matter is that Europe hasn't always given them counsel. They will shift them over to this, and no sooner will farmers borrow from the banks, commit to the this vision and this directive and this, they'll be told, oh no, we have too much of that, we have to put a levy on you now, we have targets that, emissions targets, we have environment plans, and we have to dial it all back. And farmers can get in a very bad situation. And
I can give you first-hand
distrust.
I can give you first-hand example of that, Brian, because I went to Europe shortly after we joined the European Union. I was a guest of MEP McCartan. I'm sure you're familiar with the name. They're from the Leitrim area. The McCartan brothers, I think. But we got the full
Right.
tour and we got to meet people in the Parliament. And I remember Richie Ryan, he was the Minister for Finance,
Yeah.
controversial because of some budgets he brought out. But, all the same, a good person. But he emphasized the point you made there about decisions made in Europe. And one in particular, coming back to farming, was about sheep production. Traditionally, sheep were on the peripheral, like Donegal and Mayo and on the hillsides and Kerry and that. And the good land in the Midlands was for dairy and beef. And was a very easygoing way of Midland farmers coming to the West to buy the young baby calves, bring them up for beef and milk. Sheep in the Midlands was not. But when Europe decided all of a sudden we need more sheep, and were given subsidies to farmers that started producing more sheep, and all of a sudden a green field in County Meath, you would look and it would be like it had a snowstorm of sheep.
Yes.
And to emphasize your point, what Richie Ryan said about the system in Europe, and he said it is good and it does work. But he said when it takes a long time to make a decision. And then when they find out the decision is wrong, it takes a long time to unravel it.
Yes.
And that was typical. And the same went for wine, like, white wine, red wine in Spain and Portugal and France. All of a sudden, we had lakes of wine. Good for wine drinkers like myself, because a bottle of wine went from 20 euros down to 5 euros.
Yes.
And I guess maybe the sheep. And then we had mountains of beef, lakes of wine, thanks to Europe. But it wasn't well managed until they figured out distribution and how to solve the problem that created. One.
Yeah, well, often those of the famous beef baron Larry Goodman and all the beef that was held in subsidy. Sometimes we thought that the reason Gaddafi was so easily defeated is his soldiers had been eating this bad beef. They were incapacitated. That was the Irish part, and that I don't know. But yeah, you do get these kind of directives. I mean, there was a crazy EU directive to remove hedgerows,
Right.
And actually farmers were penalized for having wilderness and fallow lands and all of that. And then, of course, they kind of crashed into reverse on that, now realizing that was. So it does create, people say, well, do they know what they're up to? But it is, as you say, John, because there's the three tier, the Council, the Commission, the Parliament, the European Court, like those big ships, it's hard to turn it around. It moves slowly. It was a desperate tragedy that Britain left the EU, because Ireland had a great ally.
Yes.
And would advocate on the same issue with Europe, who had slightly different agendas, and ours tended to coincide more.
Yes,
so rather than sort of throwing a sulk like a child on the side of the road, sitting down, it would have been better. You can affect change better from the inside. And if Europe needed change, and it needs changing, it has become much, much too interested in the big pharma, big tech, big industry, and less so in the interest of the average citizen and an average consumer. And that was a noticeable drift. Hence, as we were talked about earlier, the stronger showing for independents and single issue candidates, again saying that Europe needs to sort of re-find itself, because it's becoming, remember this, and we haven't touched on this yet, it's becoming increasingly militarized. There is a strong push even for the European army. And that there was a single kind of, what was, as we said, first it was a food secure Europe. Then it was a kind of an economic community, the economic community. Then it became the EU, the European Union, and the EU has become much more interested in how it sees itself as a single entity that may be looking up against the major power blocks of China, Russia, America. Europe needs that cohesive identity.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that in 1 second. My young friend Jimmy Grady is waiting to sing a song for you, sing a song for me, and sing a song for our audience.
Okay.
Jimmy is here in New York City. He's only 13 years old. He's getting old. When I met him first, he was 10. He's going to sing a song today. It's called Caledonia. And this song is, Caledonia is the Latin for Scotland. Great song. Made famous in Galway by Dolores Keane. But we have Jimmy Grady here in New York to give us our version of Caledonia.
I don't know if you can can see the changes that have come over me in these last few days. I've been afraid that I might drift away. I've been telling old stories, singing songs that made me think about where I came from. And that's the reason why I seem so far away today. But let me tell you that I love you and that I think about you all the time. Caledonia, you're calling me. Now I'm going home. And if I should become a stranger, you know that it would make me more than sad. Caledonia's been everything I've ever had. Oh, I have moved and I've kept on moving, proved the points that I needed proving. I have lost the friends that I needed losing, found others on the way. I have tried and I've kept on trying, stolen dreams, yes, there's no denying. I have traveled far with my conscience flying, somewhere with the wind. But let me tell you that I love you and that I think about you all the time. Caledonia, you're calling me, and now I'm going home. And if I should become a stranger, you know that it would make me more than sad. Caledonia's been everything I've ever had. Now I'm sitting here before the fire, the empty room, the forest fire. Oh, the things that couldn't get any higher, they've withered now, they're gone. But I am steady, thinking my way's clear, and now I know what I'll do tomorrow. When the hands are shaking and the kisses flow, then I will disappear. But let me tell you that I love you and that I think about you all the time. Caledonia, you're calling me. Now I'm going home. And if I should become a stranger, you know that it would make me more than sad. Caledonia's been everything I've ever had. Caledonia's been everything I've ever had.
So, Brian, welcome back, and we'll pick up where we left off with the whole European political thing, going from when it was created first, it definitely was about the common market for farmers and dairy and products and produce and everything from fruit and veg in Europe to beef in Ireland and all that. Now, as you say, because things have changed in the world, it's almost we're back to the Iron Curtain with Russia, the fear of Russia, especially after invading Ukraine, and then the threats to countries like Poland and Estonia and places like that all of a sudden want to be good EU members and part of NATO too. And it makes sense. You need someone to help you if you're not strong enough to help yourself. And China, of course, well, God made the world, everything else made in China.
Just before we were going to have this conversation, I dug out a map. It came, I think, with the Irish Times in 2000, and it was sort of looking at the expansion of Europe, the European Union, when new countries like Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania were kind of being incorporated into what was traditionally we always thought as kind of, Germany, Italy, France, Spain, that kind of that particular Europe. This is the whole northern flank. Instantly, I suppose, if you look at the lessons of history, this is what interested Hitler in getting back. He wasn't that. He never thought he'd be at war with Britain or that. He thought that would be all kind of safely of the one mind of. Whereas to push eastwards through all of those kind of, be it Austria, Hungary, Slovakia, and all of that, So you are looking at that. And when I look at the map, okay, we have Norway, who's not officially part of the EU, but has trade agreements with us, and that includes Iceland. And then you have Switzerland, which is kind of not part of the EU, but again is in our economic unit and zone. Right. But you've created a whole thing around Estonia, Latvia, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia, and then waiting kind of membership, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey. So it sweeps on to the Black Sea, right, and around the Mediterranean. And then the really strange one is the Ukraine. Because when you look at the map and you see the size of the Ukraine, relative even to Europe and the countries in that kind of eastern part, as you say, this is a real, like a major bubble. Would you say an aneurysm for Russia? But it's like a major bubble moving into what was very much the old Soviet Union, the USS, And when you think that gives so much access to the Black Sea, you see why, and I do not condone or approve of Putin at all, but you see why the Russians, Putin and his old military guard, were very alarmed at where Europe was going with this expansionist vision. It's also the grain basket of Russia. It becomes the grain basket of Europe. And if you're farming in Europe, you're thinking, well, this might be such great news for us. So it's really getting complicated now. The idea of the expansionist Europe, is it expanding too fast? Can you really do it? But could you leave someone whose sympathies and identity are leaning so much into Europe and Middle Europe, as it was always famously called, that sensibility of Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, where they had a particular kind of Baltic almost identity, but at the same time they were leaning towards Europe. So we're living in kind of potential unease as the components of Europe have to be reset.
Well, that you make very good points there, and a lot of good points. But you take a country like the size of Malta, which is a tiny country, and they will be going to vote in the European elections for their MEPs, and they will have four, and they'll have four based on the population and the size.
Yeah,
but they get the same representation, and they are part of NATO as well, and they're part of the UN. And there's a lot of stuff happening coming up in the UN in the future, and NATO will be hanging out in Washington, I think, in July for their big summit and meeting. So lots of stuff happening all in that regard. When you were mentioning there about the Black Sea, another sea worth noting is the Red Sea. And that's covered because of the war in Saddam, where half the country is fighting like a civil war against each other. It doesn't get much attention because of the other wars that's going on with Israel and Palestine.
And the Ukraine,
Russia and Ukraine, And like, if any country ever learned after 800 years of fighting the British, you do get tired, actually, and it's time to put the guns down. And as you said, talk, negotiate.
Well, John, you hit on something there, and I'm very pro-European. I think the majority of Irish people we see ourselves as continentals in a way, almost like a piece of land that broke off from Europe, whereas Britain traditionally has always seen itself as kind of unique and different, and has sprung up as a kind of its thing in itself, a bastion on its own in that part of the world. But the legacy of empire has meant that whether it was the British Empire or the French or the Belgian or the Spanish, the legacy of empire and colonialism has always been, unfortunately, that before you give back a country to anybody, you make sure you've sowed enough division in there that the first thing they'll do is attack each other. And it happened to us here in Ireland, And it was it's almost inevitable. it's almost an inevitable symptom of having been a conquered country, or, all these lines that have been drawn on maps of Europe, but also in Africa and the Middle East. They're arbitrary, created by empires, and the settling of that always tend up in a war.
Well, of course, like when the British gave back India to India, and they gave it back a year ahead of time. But they put stipulations in that was trying to divide India and cause trouble with India and Pakistan. And the negotiator, you may know, was Lord Mountbatten, who was the guy that did the paperwork for India. And he
last Viceroy of India, as he called himself.
That was the guy, and he met his demise, I think, off the coast of Sligo. But continuing on back to the candidates in Ireland, there seems to be a good mix of vibrancy. And I think I'm a Sinn Féin person shouting for Sinn Féin, of course. And why wouldn't I? Why not? There's myself and Martin McGuinness when I had black hair once upon a time. But they seem to have come a long, long way. One time, like back when maybe that photograph was taken, they didn't seem to have any economic policies. It was like political policies. But I noticed recently with a lot of candidates that they're putting up have very, very strong trajectory economic decisions on UK, Ireland, and Europe, which will benefit everyone, north and south. So it's not just going back to the day of the bomb and the bullet. This is more negotiation.
It is, and it's a miracle of negotiation that there was a peace agreement in the north, and again, no more than Europe had a big part. America had a huge role in that, and to become the kind of honest brokers and to lead those negotiations. But there was the European context of it as well. That Europe did not want a war inside its boundaries. And a lot of money could be spent in ensuring that was not going to happen. Along comes Brexit, and I mean the deals that were put on the table by Europe to favour, Northern Ireland, to give them an extraordinary, as you say, Ireland has traditionally been a kind of a stepping stone for American industries to get a foothold in Europe. We speak the same language. We have a lot of ancestral connections going back, and there's many, many reasons. And Northern Ireland was almost going to become a kind of the island of Ireland on steroids in terms of what they were willing to do. Then, of course, the unions took their feet in. And as the Irish economist David McWilliams said of Sammy Wilson, he said he's a man who never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And that was kind of the case for Northern Ireland, the very exceptional conditions. That was watered down a bit, but that's still and that's still your best chance of, I suppose, negotiating with the likes of Sinn Féin, who have a very strong vision that they really do want to see a border poll eventually. But they know that there has to be a levelling up. Now, very wise people, the likes of Bernadette Devlin, going way back, always would have said that you needn't even think about, unity in terms of the EU or anything else. Hell, the social legislation in the south of Ireland catches up with the social legislation. Well, in the north, it has.
Yes, yeah.
It's arguable whether the national health and the Irish health systems. I mean, you have Northerners looking at our hospital waiting lists and thinking, no, not yet. We're not embracing this and the economic advantages. So
I'll come to that in a second.
Yeah,
my last podcast was about Paul O'Dwyer, and I interviewed Robert Palmer. He wrote this book with Michael Tubridy, and in that discussion, we mentioned how Paul O'Dwyer had met with Bill Clinton, and their discussion was about getting the visa for Gerry Adams. And I mentioned this on the last podcast too. Up to that point, Gerry Adams, the then president of Sinn Féin, was not allowed to talk on RTE radio or television because it was the national broadcaster owned by the state. And RTE, I have my issues with RTE because they fired a good friend of mine on Christmas Eve, Donald Dooling, another journalist and reporter, for bringing toys across to Northern Ireland for the children. It was a very, very unfair and just deed. But I don't want to wash out dirty linen here with you, Brian, today. But other issues coming up, as you say, for the local elections in Ireland, definitely when people knock on the door, as you said, it will be health, crime, and
Housing.
education, and housing. Yeah,
Housing. We've it has a European context in the sense that, there was a huge push, legislative and from Europe, to privatize everything, to monetize everything, to this move away from the old idea that the state had the responsibility for people, to say, no, we'll privatize everything and if market will decide, market conditions will level out everybody in the end. And we know that to be, as you've discovered in America, we know that if you the best mix is social democracy. It's democracy where the capitalists are free to pursue their goals, but there has to be a kind of a social dimension to that.
Yeah, aspect, yeah.
I think it was a good line in a film. It said the difference that, you were talking about your Sinn Féin politics and I'm a kind of socialist, and it says that the socialist is somebody who wants to share the wealth and a communist wants to spread the poverty. And so the argument was made that the social contract was about communism. It's not. It's about checks on balances on, wholesale free market. The free market was brought to the Irish housing, and it soon became apparent that, this doesn't work in terms of your average householder or you and I grew up, John, we would have known the council houses and council estates, and there would have been a massive program of building, in the early years of the state to try and look after its citizens. And that vision was kind of sacrificed with the collusion and pushing of Europe towards this economic model, Reaganomics and Thatcherism and all of that sort of, and you're really, the seeds, the fruits of that toxic harvest are what you have now, because it takes could take a decade for the neglect to become so manifest. That said, we're also victims of our own success. I mean, the population has doubled here, at least, more people need more homes, and the development plans were in place, but I don't think they quite reckoned on how fast the country would grow, the level of economic prosperity we have. Some would argue with that. I heard an economist say something incredible to me. He says, inflation is coming down, but prices are going up. How they figured that out. But this is the kind of model we have at the moment.
I did my predictions on inflation and the price of oil last January, and indeed the January before. And I predicted here that inflation would be coming down from some 8 or 9% down to less than 3%. Which it is already yet here. And on my last podcast, I predicted the price of oil, it was down from 90 to 86 and so on. And I feel it's come down to $75 a barrel soon. But getting back to your definition there of things, I heard a definition one time of socialism, that a socialist is somebody that has nothing and wants to share with everyone.
That's they're the communists. The socialists want to share the wealth.
Share the poverty. Okay, Brian.
But the thing is that you need a bit, you need a bit of both. You do need balance. You need your entrepreneurial spirit. You need people to see an opportunity to make money and go for it. But when it comes to providing a roof over one's head, when it comes to providing education and health, I think you have to dial back on the profit taken out of that and take the private operators out of that. Those are part of our social contract, always were. You vote and you participate in democracy because at some level it's supposed to look after you.
I've come across situations here in America too, and getting back to the Catholic Church per se, and the other churches too, like they have failed badly, all of them. Like during the coronavirus here, the best the Catholic Church could do was its congregation how to direct debit money into the church plate because nobody was attending mass. They still wanted to collect the money even though they were doing nothing, But I will move on because I have to move on to something else, Brian. Let me ask you, where do we get your new book, by the way?
Well, the new book, funny enough, talk about social and corporate models. I've been we have an imprint called Lepus Print, which is the Latin for hair, lepus or lepus, and we have a web LEPUS, Lepus Print. You can get the books off that, and we tend to be selling through that. And then in the smaller, independent, family-run bookshops, because we do now have a vast new fulfillment center, as Amazon call it, but we have a gorgeous local bookshop. So I'm the old social media kid. You may be fighting a losing war, but we tend to be small, independent, and family-run affairs. So that's where the books are available.
Right.
And
I have to mention I'm running an art show this weekend and the following weekend, and it's in Ryder Avenue in the Bronx. I'll put up the flyer again on this, but it's running now to the end of May, actually. And I needed some games for teenagers and kids. And I was online and I found a handmade ring board for playing rings.
Lovely. I remember the rings.
Which is good for children to learn mathematics.
Yeah,
and then I came across a jigsaw of the map of Ireland, all the counties coloured in. And my challenge will be for the kids next weekend and the following weekend and at the end of May, when I break up the map of Ireland jigsaw, if they can unite Ireland on the jigsaw in 1 minute, they will win a prize. And the ring board is the other one. So again, art show this weekend, 18th and 19th, and the following weekend, and again all the way to the end. And my email, jhfornews@yahoo.com, if anyone wants information on it. I do have marketing tables available as well for members of the IBO or whoever else. IBO is a great organization here in New York for promoting and helping Irish business and all that.
I suppose, John, the final thing I'd say is that, having talked about politics in the round and tried to avoid sort of pushing for any particular candidate or side, but just to give a sense of the geopolitical forces at play a little bit, I would tell anyone listening to you that, sometimes you have to put that all aside and just go with your gut and just trust that you have a sense of what's right and wrong or fair or proportionate, and that I heard a nice thing, or came up with a nice thing, that the biggest mistake you can make is to be afraid of making mistakes.
That's true.
So just exercise your rights, go out there and vote, and be your own best.
Well, very, very. You couldn't have said it better. We're winding down. And lately I've been winding off in my Gaelic language, of course. But on the last few episodes, I've played the European anthem, which was composed by Beethoven, I think, in 1896.
Ode to Joy.
Ode to Joy is right. Which basically, the lyrics of it is like about harmony and prosperity and brotherhood and so on and so forth. So I'm going to say goodbye to you, Brian. Yeah. So I'll probably have you back, Brian, to do the analysis after the elections, so we can look at who won, who lost, who fell, who ran, and who made it. And
John, we shall be like typical economists. All economists, they said, is they explain to you what's going to happen, and the following week come back and tell you why it didn't happen. So that's basically what we do.
My predictions have been pretty okay thus far, but you never know. Things change. Okay, I remember another politician from your neck of the woods, Sean Doherty, was the Minister for Justice at the time, and it was an election came up for member of the Irish Parliament, and he lost badly, very badly. And I think it was Ted Nealon from Sligo asked him on a radio interview. He said, "Pod the Horror, it means what happened?" And Sean just coolly said to him, "Not enough people voted for me. That's all that happened."
That's very decisive discovery for anyone in politics. It all comes down to that.
So we're going to go out with Ode to Joy by Beethoven, the European anthem, and it's a beautiful piece. It has many different versions, but we'll sail out on that. So, Slán Abhaile.
Slán, you are.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Frank.